it is essential to talk about sofas and their immense dangers. This is not because anybody needs to be reminded of the unhealthiness of sofas. If there's any object designed for sitting which is at the same time overly comfortable, we must ask ourselves, to what extent is this a member of the chair or bench family, and to what extent is this, on the contrary, like a straitjacket or a ball and chain? One sinks into a sofa and is provided with powerful stimuli that inhibit the willpower to stand. Our legs dangle uselessly over the edge, and the force of gravity affects itself most strongly on our torsos, which are thereby pressed deep into the cushions unless we give a considerable effort, usually involving the exertion of every limb. This, in my account, is sufficient to mark the sofa as a sort of bonding implement. Yet, unlike cuffs, chains, ropes, and indeed corsets, it is kosher to have a great deal of admiration for sofas. And this, as far as I'm concerned, is traceable to several incompetent myths that currently govern our lackluster discourse about these pervasive and dangerous stains on the already overbearing microgeography of suburban life. This video presentation will, once and for all, reveal and refute the unspoken and insidious propositions in favor of sofa ownership and use. Proposition 1. That sofas are ideal for small social gatherings in the primary living area. A sofa proponent will be quick to remind us of the many Thanksgivings, Christmases, and that's it, whereupon 3 or 12 or more disassociated family members made frustrating conversation about things too offensive to be agreeable and too polite to be interesting. This, apparently, is supposed to be regarded as a great reason for the acquisition of a sofa, for without its 1.75 meter length, there would be nowhere for 3 or 4 of these unhappy family members to sit and bicker and dodge interesting questions while watching their children. We can refute this nonsensical proposition firstly by suggesting that these family members sit on the floor, for if it is well kept, or there is a nice rug, then there is nothing undignifying about sitting cross-legged where you are at eye level with the children, and may more readily reassume a standing position. Furthermore, if we really must maintain a metaphor of domination over those who are still too small and too lively to be respected, one presumes that the acquisition of 3 stools, or even 4, would be far less of an economical investment and take up far less space than the average sofa. As for the elderly, and perhaps least consulted at these gatherings, the proposition that they need soft and comfortable surfaces on which to rest their wrinkly and decrepit rumps is disingenuous, because how often are these room-wide recliners reserved exclusively for the elderly in actual practice? It is far more likely that the young adults and middle-aged who primarily occupy these sofas are, because of their sofa-induced stasis, a little further on their way to joining their grandparents in their significantly inhibited ability to move and walk. Most of the time, a rocking chair, perhaps with a cushion, will more than suffice to ease these aging men and women as they listen to their offspring bicker about a world from which they may feel increasingly excluded. As such, the ideal living area, rather than having a seductive polyester brick dominate the space, should have ample room to move around, cushions for hard stools and chairs that can be repositioned as the situation requires, perhaps a rug for visual stimulation and comfortable seating, and, all told, several smaller and inexpensive options for seating, so that people with different preferences can choose the seating they most require or enjoy. Proposition 2. That sofas are ideal for the watching of sports, television, and films.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want, and I always...
In the case of sporting events, we will first of all see that it is not only acceptable, but essential to arrange seating that is designed for short bursts rather than several hours of continuous seating. We need only follow the example of an actual sporting venue to see that this is clearly the case. Most bleachers and sporting arenas have small, hard, and borderline uncomfortable seating arrangements for spectators. This has a business advantages for the venue encouraging attendees to frequently leave their seats during intermissions or breaks in play, with a visit to the concession being one of the only viable excuses for this almost physically necessary action. There are also benefits to the viewers themselves. Thanks to the discomfort associated with the steep and compact seating arrangements, spectators are highly encouraged to direct most of their attention and energy to the actual game and proceedings of play. This makes for a more immersive and satisfying experience of the event. At home, we certainly cannot replicate the adrenaline of the communal aspects associated with being in a larger crowd, but mimicking the philosophy of actual sporting venues is more than feasible. Our seating arrangements should encourage frequent trips to the kitchen for snacks and for intermittent banter with household members who are not sport enthusiasts. It is not necessary for sports fans to remain seated and fully absorb every commercial break. In many cases, you will find them complaining about these anyway. So, a seating arrangement that encourages the person to remain seated when they actually have other preferences and concerns is far from ideal. However, the commercial standard for seating in cinemas is a new question because unlike sporting events, it's actually ideal to remain seated for the entire 90-minute or 3-hour runtime. We do see large, heavily cushioned and reclining chairs in theaters because of this very problem. Such an arrangement would seem to complicate and challenge the argument of this essay, until we reflect on our actual experience of movie theater seats. They recline too easily, resulting in a feeling of instability and groundlessness, so that they must be carefully tested and surrendered to before we can become accustomed to their embrace. Once we do, our immersion in the movie takes our attention away from the sinking, squirming feeling in our bodies which is caused by the chair. And as soon as the film is over, and we get up, the sensations of discomfort start racing between our brains and our lower backs and bums. It is the same ugly feeling we get when waddling across a gas station parking lot after sitting in a car on a highway for 90 minutes. Whether we can regularly tolerate much more time in the insidiously welcoming posture of such a seating implement without sustaining permanent injury is unknown to me. With these considerations in mind, we must think carefully about mimicking movie theater seating in our own homes. Perhaps a beanbag or a gloriously large pillow would serve as a better reclining implement for those rare cases where it is absolutely necessary to assume a submissive and defeated posture. Otherwise, we must bear in mind the primary point that overly comfortable seating is not desirable when you wish to be immersed in a sporting event or a story. Proposition 3. That sofas are ideal for cuddling, spooning, and other such intimate acts. Many times I have heard the same thing from people who are in love, or, which is more common, people who purport to share economic interests. Namely, that sofas are ideal spaces for cuddling, spooning, and other intimate activities. I will insist that in reality, sofas are merely possible locations for showing affection, and by no means uniquely advantageous ones. As everyone knows, close relationships of all kinds are sustained primarily thanks to strong emotional bonds, long interpersonal histories, shared values and experiences, and continued demonstration of trust and respect. When these elements of a relationship are in a healthy state, nearly any venue will serve just fine for intimate activities. The rug and cushions mentioned earlier would be more than sufficient, for example, if 2 or more people feel the need to hug, cuddle, or sit closely. In fact, if the acquisition of a sofa is deemed to be a required implement by one or another member of a close relationship, suspicion should arise as to whether it is merely a desire for comfort, rather than a sincere love and appreciation for the other person that is motivating the participation in the relationship. In this way, a sofa may be used as a tool for the measurement of trust and love, and it needn't actually be purchased or present for this end. One need only ask one's partner, would you still love me if we could only hold each other in a seated position if we were using relatively firm surfaces, such as a floor or a wooden bench, excluding, of course, the use of a bed? If the answer is no, you can rest assured that the relationship is not worth maintaining in any case, and there is no reason to be lying about on the floor or a couch. You may instead go out and about. Proposition 4, that sofas are decent supplementary bedding. There is a common phrase in our culture, used when someone is staying over at another person's house, usually with little notice or out of desperation, and has therefore been given only the most basic hospitality. Barry Smith may say that he was sleeping on John Doe's couch. We say it so often that he might use the same wording even if he actually slept on the floor. We believe, it seems, that in a pinch, if there is an extra unexpected guest, or indeed a disagreement in the master bedroom, that the couch, the sofa, is the ideal place to sleep. Of all the malarkey, I find it disheartening that this uncultured and thoughtless approximation has gained precedent. Let us remind ourselves of the many key design differences between the average sofa and the average bed. First, the texture of our average sofa is informed as much, if not more, by aesthetic considerations than by any consideration of softness or comfort. As a result, there may be all manner of ornate, leathery, assertive, beveled, and altogether three-dimensional stitching or fabric adorning the surface of these cushions, which is a far cry from the comparatively intimate and tender nature of even the oldest and most uncomfortable mattresses. Secondly, as these furnishing implements are designed for upright seating, even if we must be unduly reclined, you will find that head and arm rests tend to be far too close together for anyone with any considerable height to lay completely flat. As many people's husbands are at or in excess of 6 feet in height, this is something to take into serious consideration. The argument that hide-a-beds or pull-out beds factor into this conversation at all is disingenuous, for I do not consider it a positive attribute of sofas that they can sometimes cease to be sofas and become beds instead, which are much better pieces of furniture. I can hear the rebuttals. But where will my cousin stay when she gets out of prison? Where will I send my husband if he is being discourteous? For these purposes, I propose that it should be customary for every major household to own a simple and inexpensive cot or two, and this will allow for much more inexpensive and arguably more comfortable supplementary or emergency bedding. Now that I have convincingly argued against the ownership and use of sofas, couches, chesterfields, or whatever other godforsaken name you want to use for these shamefully designed and immorally produced people traps, I'm going to suggest that unless you are unconvinced by my arguments, you disassemble your sofa and reuse or sell its component parts. Don't burn it wholesale, as that could be a little bit too destructive or wasteful, and definitely don't sell it, as that will merely allow another person to be gradually physically hurt by it. Instead, invest some time in finding a use for the leather or wood that was used to construct it, and definitely make sure that you and the people you care about don't make any more investments in these unnecessary contraptions. Thank you for listening to this video presentation, and I hope you have a good day.